The morning sun cast long shadows across the hallways of Riverside High School as Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the familiar corridor. At 42, she had been working as a janitor at the school for nearly 8 years, arriving before dawn and leaving long after the last student went home. Her weathered hands gripped the mop handle with practiced ease, but her mind wandered to places far beyond these walls. Maria had always been different. While other children played with dolls or toy cars, she found herself fascinated by numbers and patterns. She would spend hours creating mathematical equations in the dirt behind her childhood home in El Salvador, solving problems that would challenge students twice her age. Her grandmother would watch from the kitchen window, shaking her head with a mixture of pride and concern. "Mia," her grandmother would say, "numbers won't feed your family. Learn to clean, learn to cook. These are skills that will keep you alive." But Maria couldn't help herself. Even now, as she mopped the floors of the mathematics department, she would glance at the equations written on whiteboards, her mind automatically working through solutions. She understood calculus better than most college students. Having taught herself from discarded textbooks she found in dumpsters and library books she borrowed during her lunch breaks. The other janitors at Riverside High School respected Maria. She was reliable, hardworking, and never complained about the long hours or difficult tasks. But they didn't know about the notebooks hidden in her locker, filled with complex mathematical proofs and theories she worked on during her spare time. They didn't know that she had been quietly auditing online mathematics courses for years, learning advanced concepts that most people would find impossible to understand. Dr. Patricia Whitfield, the head of the mathematics department, was everything Maria was not. Born into privilege, she had attended the finest schools, earned her PhD from an Ivy League university, and had been teaching at Riverside High for 15 years. She was known for her sharp tongue and her belief that intelligence could be measured by one's educational pedigree and social status. Dr. Whitfield had noticed Maria over the years, but only as part of the background. To her, Maria was just another member of the cleaning staff, invisible and unimportant. She had never bothered to learn Maria's name, referring to her simply as the janitor when she needed something cleaned or moved in her classroom. On this particular Tuesday morning, Dr. Whitfield was preparing for her advanced placement calculus class when she noticed that someone had erased one of her complex equations from the whiteboard. The equation had been part of a challenging problem involving derivatives and integrals that she had been working through with her most advanced students. "Excuse me," Dr. Whitfield called out to Maria, who was emptying trash cans nearby. "Did you clean my whiteboard?" Maria looked up, setting down the trash bag she was holding. "Yes, ma'am. I always clean the boards at night unless there's a note asking me not to." Dr. Whitfield's face showed her annoyance. "That was an important equation. Now I'll have to rewrite the entire thing." She walked over to the board and began writing out the complex calculus problem again, muttering under her breath about people who don't understand the importance of academic work. As Maria continued her cleaning duties, she couldn't help but glance at the equation Dr. Whitfield was writing. It was a problem involving the optimization of a function with multiple variables, the kind of challenge that would require careful analysis of critical points and boundary conditions. In her mind, Maria began working through the solution, identifying the key steps needed to find the maximum and minimum values. Dr. Whitfield finished writing the equation and stepped back to review her work. "There," she said, more to herself than to Maria. "Though I suppose it doesn't matter if certain people can't appreciate the complexity of real mathematics." The comment stung, but Maria had grown accustomed to being underestimated and overlooked. She had learned long ago that her appearance, her job, and her accent caused many people to make assumptions about her intelligence and capabilities. Rather than respond, she simply nodded and continued with her work. As the morning progressed, students began arriving for Dr. Whitfield's AP Calculus class. These were some of the brightest students at Riverside High, young people who had been identified as mathematically gifted and were being prepared for college-level mathematics. They filed into the classroom with confidence, carrying expensive calculators and designer notebooks. Maria finished her cleaning duties in the mathematics wing and was preparing to move to another part of the school when she heard Dr. Whitfield addressing her students. "Today we're going to tackle one of the most challenging problems you'll encounter this semester," Dr. Whitfield announced. This equation represents a real-world optimization problem that requires a deep understanding of multivariable calculus. I expect this will take most of our class period to solve, and even then, some of you may struggle with the more complex aspects. The students looked at the whiteboard with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Several immediately began pulling out their calculators and reference books, preparing for what they knew would be a difficult challenge. Maria paused in the doorway, her cleaning supplies forgotten for a moment as she looked at the equation one more time. In her mind, she had already identified the solution path, recognizing the patterns and relationships that would lead to the correct answer. But she knew better than to linger. She was just the janitor after all, and her presence was not welcome in this academic space. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, Maria could hear Dr. Whitfield beginning to guide the students through the problem-solving process. The teacher's voice carried a note of superiority, as if she were revealing sacred mathematical secrets to a chosen few. But Maria carried her own secrets, her own understanding of the mathematical universe that surrounded them all. She had learned that intelligence came in many forms, and that wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places. As she continued her work, cleaning and maintaining the school that had become her second home, she held on to the knowledge that she was more than what others saw when they looked at her. The day continued as it always did, with Maria working quietly in the background while the important business of education happened around her. But something was building beneath the surface, a tension that would soon change everything for both Maria and Dr. Whitfield. The equation on the whiteboard was more than just a mathematical problem. It was about to become the catalyst for a confrontation that would challenge everything. Both women thought they knew about intelligence, respect, and human potential. 3 days had passed since Dr. Whitfield had rewritten the complex calculus equation on her whiteboard. The advanced placement students had struggled with the problem, spending 2 full class periods working through various approaches. Even with Dr. Whitfield's guidance, only 2 students had managed to arrive at the correct solution, and even they had required significant help along the way. Maria had returned to clean the mathematics department each evening, carefully avoiding the whiteboard that still displayed the unsolved portions of the equation. She noticed the eraser marks and crossed-out work that showed the students' attempts and failures. Her fingers itched to pick up the marker and complete the solution that played so clearly in her mind, but she resisted the urge. On Friday afternoon, as the school day was ending, Maria was refilling the soap dispensers in the mathematics department when she overheard Dr. Whitfield talking to another teacher in the hallway. "Honestly, Sarah, I'm beginning to wonder about the quality of students we're getting these days," Dr. Whitfield was saying to Sarah Chen, the chemistry teacher. "I gave them what should be a standard optimization problem, and most of them couldn't even identify the critical points properly." Sarah laughed sympathetically. "At least your students are trying to solve real problems. Half of mine can't balance a simple chemical equation without a calculator. It's frustrating," Dr. Whitfield continued. "Mathematics is supposed to be the queen of sciences, but these kids want everything handed to them. They don't understand that true mathematical insight requires years of rigorous training and intellectual development. You can't just stumble into understanding calculus." The conversation stung Maria more than she cared to admit. She had been stumbling into mathematical understanding her entire life, teaching herself concepts that others spent years studying in expensive classrooms. But she knew that Dr. Whitfield's words weren't really about the students. They were about people like her, people who were assumed to be incapable of intellectual achievement based on their circumstances. That evening, after all the students and teachers had gone home, Maria found herself alone in Dr. Whitfield's classroom. The equation still covered half of the whiteboard, with various student attempts and partial solutions scattered around it. She set down her cleaning supplies and walked closer to examine the work. The problem was indeed challenging, but not insurmountable. It required finding the maximum and minimum values of a function subject to certain constraints, a classic application of Lagrange multipliers. Maria could see where the students had gotten confused. They had tried to apply standard techniques without recognizing that the constraint created a more complex relationship between the variables. Before she realized what she was doing, Maria had picked up a marker. Her hand moved across the whiteboard with surprising confidence, writing out the solution in clear, logical steps. She set up the Lagrangian function, calculated the partial derivatives, and solved the resulting system of equations. Within minutes, she had completed what had taken the advanced students days to struggle through unsuccessfully. As she stepped back to review her work, Maria felt a moment of satisfaction. The solution was elegant and complete, showing not just the final answer but the mathematical reasoning that led to it. But then reality set in. She quickly erased her work, her heart pounding as she realized what she had just done. If anyone discovered that the janitor had solved the equation, it would raise questions she wasn't ready to answer. But Maria had made a mistake. In her haste to erase the solution, she had missed a small section in the corner of the whiteboard where she had written out a key insight about the relationship between the constraint and the objective function. The mathematical notation was subtle, but it was clearly not part of the student's earlier work. The next Monday morning, Dr. Whitfield arrived early to prepare for her first class. As she reviewed the whiteboard, she noticed the additional mathematical notation that hadn't been there on Friday. Her first thought was that one of her students had returned over the weekend to work on the problem, but the handwriting was different from anything she had seen in class. Interesting, she muttered to herself, studying the notation more carefully. Whoever had written it had demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of the problem, identifying a crucial insight that even she had glossed over in her own solution. But who could have written it? During her first period class, Dr. Whitfield questioned her students about the mysterious mathematical notation, but none of them claimed responsibility. The writing was clearly not from any of her current students, and the level of insight suggested someone with advanced mathematical training. Perhaps it was a student from one of the other advanced classes, suggested Jessica, one of her top students. Maybe someone was using the room for tutoring. Dr. Whitfield made a mental note to check with the other mathematics teachers, but something about the notation bothered her. The style was different from what she would expect from a student, even an advanced one. There was a maturity to the mathematical thinking that suggested someone with years of experience working with complex problems. As the day progressed, Dr. Whitfield found herself increasingly curious about the mystery mathematician. She checked with her colleagues, but none of them had given students permission to use her classroom over the weekend. The custodial staff had keys, of course, but the idea that one of them might have solved her calculus problem was absurd. That afternoon, as Maria was cleaning the mathematics department, Dr. Whitfield decided to satisfy her curiosity. "Excuse me," she called out to Maria. "Were you working in here over the weekend?" Maria looked up from the desk she was wiping down. "Yes, ma'am. I clean all the classrooms on Saturday mornings. Did you notice anyone else in this room? Perhaps a student working on mathematics problems?" Maria shook her head. "No, ma'am. The building was empty except for security and the cleaning crew." Dr. Whitfield studied Maria's face, looking for any sign that she might know more than she was saying. But Maria's expression remained neutral and professional. "Did you notice any changes to the whiteboard? Someone wrote additional work on the equation I've been using with my students." "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't usually pay attention to what's written on the boards. I just clean around them unless I'm asked to erase something." The answer seemed reasonable, but Dr. Whitfield couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. She decided to conduct a small experiment. "Since you clean in here regularly," Dr. Whitfield said, "you must have noticed this equation. Do you have any idea what it means?" The question was clearly intended to be condescending, but Maria recognized the trap. If she claimed complete ignorance, she would be lying. If she demonstrated any understanding, she would reveal more about herself than she was ready to share. "It looks complicated," Maria replied carefully. "I can see it's mathematics, but that's not something I would understand." Dr. Whitfield nodded, satisfied that she had confirmed her assumptions about the cleaning staff's intellectual limitations. But as Maria continued her work, Dr. Whitfield noticed something that made her pause. When Maria thought she wasn't being observed, her eyes kept returning to the whiteboard. There was something in her gaze that suggested more than casual curiosity. For the rest of the week, Dr. Whitfield found herself paying more attention to Maria's presence in her classroom. She began to notice small things. The way Maria's eyes would linger on mathematical equations, the careful way she cleaned around important work without disturbing it, and the quiet intelligence that seemed to emanate from her despite her humble circumstances. But Dr. Whitfield pushed these observations aside. She had been teaching for 15 years, and she knew intelligence when she saw it. Intelligence came from good schools, advanced degrees, and the kind of rigorous intellectual training that required privilege and opportunity. It didn't come from people who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. The mystery of the additional notation remained unsolved, but Dr. Whitfield had more pressing concerns. Her students were struggling with increasingly complex problems, and she needed to focus on preparing them for their upcoming examinations. The janitor and her quiet observations were just a distraction from the real work of education. 2 weeks had passed since the mysterious mathematical notation appeared on Dr. Whitfield's whiteboard. The incident had faded from her immediate concerns, buried under the daily pressures of teaching and preparing her students for their advanced placement examinations. But fate had a way of bringing unresolved mysteries back to the surface. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Dr. Whitfield was staying late to grade papers when she heard voices in the hallway outside her classroom. Curious, she walked to her door and saw Maria talking quietly with Tommy Rodriguez, a sophomore student who had been struggling in his basic algebra class. "I don't understand why this doesn't work," Tommy was saying, holding up a piece of paper with mathematical equations written on it. "I follow all the steps my teacher showed us, but I keep getting the wrong answer." Dr. Whitfield expected to hear Maria make some excuse about not being able to help, but instead, she watched in amazement as Maria took the paper and studied it carefully. "You're making the equation more complicated than it needs to be," Maria said gently. "Look here, in step 3, you're trying to solve for x, but you've introduced an extra variable that doesn't belong in the problem." Tommy looked confused. "But that's how Mrs. Peterson showed us to do it." "Mrs. Peterson is right for more complex problems," Maria explained patiently. "But this one can be solved more simply. Let me show you." Dr. Whitfield watched in stunned silence as Maria took a pencil and began working through the algebra problem on Tommy's paper. Her movements were confident and precise, and she explained each step in clear, simple terms that Tommy could understand. "See?" Maria said, finishing the solution. "When you remove that extra step, the algebra becomes much clearer. The answer is x equals 7. Tommy's face lit up with understanding. "Oh, I see it now. I was making it harder than it needed to be. Thank you so much, Miss Maria. You explain it better than my teacher does. Practice a few more problems like this one," Maria advised. "Once you understand the pattern, it will become automatic." As Tommy walked away, clutching his paper with renewed confidence, Dr. Whitfield felt her worldview shifting beneath her feet. She had just witnessed the school janitor providing mathematical tutoring that was more effective than what the paid teachers had offered. The implications were staggering and deeply uncomfortable. Dr. Whitfield retreated to her classroom, her mind racing with questions and doubts. How could Maria, a woman who cleaned floors for a living, demonstrate such mathematical competence? Where had she learned these skills? And more troubling still, what did this say about Dr. Whitfield's own assumptions about intelligence and education? Over the next few days, Dr. Whitfield found herself observing Maria more closely. She began to notice things she had overlooked before. The way Maria's eyes would track across mathematical equations as she cleaned. The careful attention she paid to complex problems on whiteboards, and the occasional moments when her face would show recognition and understanding. But Dr. Whitfield's academic pride fought against these observations. She had spent her entire career building her reputation as an expert mathematician and educator. The idea that a janitor might possess comparable skills challenged everything she believed about intellectual hierarchy and social order. The confrontation came on a Thursday afternoon. Dr. Whitfield was working late, preparing an especially challenging calculus problem for her advanced placement students. The equation involved complex integration techniques and would require her best students to apply multiple mathematical concepts simultaneously. As she wrote the problem on the whiteboard, Dr. Whitfield became aware that Maria was cleaning nearby, emptying trash cans and wiping down desks. Usually, she would ignore the janitor's presence, but today, she felt an almost compulsive need to test her growing suspicions. "This is probably the most difficult problem my students will face this semester," Dr. Whitfield said aloud, not directly addressing Maria but speaking loudly enough to be heard. "It requires a deep understanding of advanced integration techniques. Only students with years of rigorous mathematical training could hope to solve something like this." Maria continued her work without responding, but Dr. Whitfield noticed that she had paused in her cleaning to look at the whiteboard. I suppose it must look like meaningless symbols to someone without proper mathematical education, Dr. Whitfield continued, her voice taking on a condescending tone. These are the kinds of problems that separate those who truly understand mathematics from those who simply memorize basic procedures. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maria felt the familiar sting of being dismissed and underestimated, but this time, something was different. Perhaps it was the accumulated weight of years of being invisible and undervalued. Or perhaps it was simply that the mathematics on the board was so clear to her that she couldn't pretend otherwise. The integral of x squared times the natural logarithm of x, Maria said quietly, not looking up from her cleaning. Dr. Whitfield stopped writing and turned around. What did you say? The problem on your board, Maria repeated, her voice slightly stronger. You're asking students to find the integral of x squared times the natural logarithm of x. It's a integration by parts problem. Dr. Whitfield felt her breath catch in her throat. The janitor had not only recognized the mathematical notation, but had correctly identified the type of problem and the solution technique required. That's impossible, Dr. Whitfield said, more to herself than to Maria. You couldn't possibly understand what that means. Maria finally looked up from her cleaning, meeting Dr. Whitfield's eyes for the first time in 8 years. You would set u equal to the natural logarithm of x and dv equal to x squared dx. Then do would be dx over x, and v would be x cubed over 3. The solution would be x cubed times natural log of x over 3, minus the integral of x squared over 3 dx. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Whitfield stared at Maria as if seeing her for the first time, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. The janitor had not only identified the problem correctly, but had outlined the exact solution method that Dr. Whitfield had planned to teach her advanced students. How do you know that? Dr. Whitfield demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief and something approaching anger. Maria set down her cleaning supplies and straightened up. For 8 years, she had remained invisible in this school, accepting the assumptions and dismissals that came with her job. But something had shifted in this moment, and there was no going back. I know it because mathematics doesn't care about your job title or the color of your skin, Maria said calmly. Numbers don't ask to see your diploma before they reveal their secrets. The integral of x squared ln x is the same whether it's solved by a professor or a janitor. Dr. Whitfield felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about intelligence, education, and social hierarchy was being challenged by this quiet woman who had been cleaning her classroom for years. But how? Dr. Whitfield pressed. Where did you learn this? You're a janitor. I'm a person who happens to work as a janitor, Maria corrected. I learned mathematics the same way anyone learns it, by studying, practicing, and thinking. The only difference is that I did it in my spare time, with library books and online courses, instead of in expensive classrooms. The two women stood facing each other across the classroom, separated by years of assumptions and misunderstandings. Dr. Whitfield's world had been turned upside down, and Maria had finally revealed a truth she had kept hidden for nearly a decade. Neither woman knew it yet, but this moment would change both of their lives forever. The tension in Dr. Whitfield's classroom was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Both women stood frozen in the aftermath of Maria's revelation, each trying to process what had just happened. Dr. Whitfield's carefully constructed worldview was crumbling, while Maria felt exposed and vulnerable after years of hiding her mathematical abilities. This is ridiculous, Dr. Whitfield finally said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and confusion. You expect me to believe that a janitor has taught herself advanced calculus? That's not how mathematics education works. You can't just pick up integration by parts from library books. Maria felt something break inside her chest. After years of being dismissed and overlooked, she had finally revealed her truth only to have it rejected outright. The pain was sharp and immediate, but it was also familiar. She had faced disbelief and condescension her entire life. You're right, Maria said quietly, beginning to pack up her cleaning supplies. I should know my place, but Dr. Whitfield wasn't finished. The revelation that her janitor might possess mathematical skills comparable to her own had shaken her to the core, and she needed to prove to herself that it was impossible. Wait, Dr. Whitfield said, walking to the whiteboard. If you really understand calculus as well as you claim, then prove it. Solve this problem completely. She began writing a new equation on the board, one that was even more complex than the integration by parts problem. This one involved multiple integration techniques, trigonometric substitution, and required careful analysis of limits and convergence. It was the kind of problem that would challenge even her most advanced students. This is a definite integral involving trigonometric functions and exponential decay, Dr. Whitfield said as she finished writing. It requires knowledge of multiple integration techniques, series expansions, and limit analysis. If you're as mathematically sophisticated as you claim, you should be able to solve it. The challenge was clear, and both women understood the stakes. If Maria could solve the problem, it would validate her claims about her mathematical abilities. If she couldn't, it would confirm Dr. Whitfield's belief that true mathematical expertise required formal education and institutional training. Maria looked at the equation on the whiteboard. It was indeed challenging, requiring several different approaches and careful attention to mathematical details. But it was not beyond her capabilities. She had encountered similar problems in her self-directed studies, and she understood the underlying mathematical principles. "You want me to solve this to prove that I'm intelligent enough to deserve your respect?" Maria asked, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "I want you to prove that your claims about understanding mathematics are more than just lucky guesses," Dr. Whitfield replied. Maria walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. For a moment she hesitated. Once she began, there would be no hiding anymore. Her secret would be out, and she would have to face whatever consequences came from revealing her true capabilities. But then she thought about Tommy Rodriguez and the other students she had quietly helped over the years. She thought about all the times she had bitten her tongue when she could have contributed to mathematical discussions. She thought about the woman she might have become if she had been born into different circumstances. Maria began to write. Her hand moved across the whiteboard with confident strokes, breaking down the complex integral into manageable parts. She identified the trigonometric substitution needed for the first term, then worked through the exponential integration required for the second part. Her mathematical notation was clear and precise, and her logical progression was flawless. Dr. Whitfield watched in stunned silence as Maria worked through the problem. Each step revealed not just mathematical competence but genuine mathematical insight. This wasn't someone who had memorized procedures. This was someone who truly understood the underlying mathematical relationships. As Maria worked, she explained her reasoning aloud, almost forgetting her audience as she became absorbed in the mathematical beauty of the problem. The key insight here is recognizing that the trigonometric component can be transformed using the identity sin squared theta equals 1 minus cos 2. Theta over 2, Maria said, writing out the substitution. This allows us to separate the integral into two more manageable parts. She continued working through the problem, handling each challenge with mathematical sophistication that would have impressed college professors. When she reached a particularly complex step involving series convergence, she paused to provide additional explanation. This series converges because the exponential decay dominates the trigonometric oscillation, she said. The ratio test confirms convergence, and we can evaluate the limit using L'Hopital's rule. 15 minutes later, Maria set down the marker and stepped back from the whiteboard. The complete solution was there in black ink, showing not just the final numerical answer but the mathematical journey that led to it. Dr. Whitfield stared at the whiteboard in complete shock. The solution was not only correct but demonstrated a level of mathematical maturity that surpassed many of her own students. The janitor she had dismissed and ignored for 8 years had just solved a graduate-level calculus problem with apparent ease. How is this possible? Dr. Whitfield whispered more to herself than to Maria. I told you, Maria replied, her voice tired but dignified. Mathematics doesn't care about your circumstances. It only cares about your willingness to think and learn. But Dr. Whitfield's shock was quickly being replaced by something darker. The implications of what she had just witnessed were staggering and deeply uncomfortable. If Maria possessed this level of mathematical ability, what did that say about the assumptions Dr. Whitfield had made about intelligence, education, and social hierarchy? This doesn't make sense, Dr. Whitfield said, her voice rising with agitation. You can't just teach yourself advanced mathematics. These concepts require years of formal training, proper instruction, and academic discipline. Where did you go to school? What degrees do you have? I have a high school diploma from El Salvador, Maria said simply. Everything else I learned on my own. That's impossible, Dr. Whitfield insisted. No one learns calculus from library books. You must have had formal training somewhere. Maybe you went to college in El Salvador? Maria shook her head. I came to this country when I was 19. My family needed money, so I worked in factories and cleaned offices. I learned mathematics because I loved it, not because anyone taught me it was possible. The truth was simple and devastating. Dr. Whitfield had built her entire professional identity around the belief that mathematical expertise was the exclusive domain of those with proper education and training. The idea that someone could achieve comparable understanding through self-directed learning challenged everything she thought she knew about intelligence and ability. You're lying, Dr. Whitfield said, her voice harsh with desperation. Or you're cheating somehow. No janitor could solve problems like this. The words hung in the air like a slap. Maria felt the familiar sting of being dismissed and diminished. But this time it was worse because she had dared to hope that demonstrating her abilities might earn her some measure of respect. I see, Maria said quietly, beginning to pack up her cleaning supplies again. I should have known better than to think that solving your mathematics problems would change how you see me. To you I will always be just a janitor, no matter what I can do. She walked toward the door, but Dr. Whitfield wasn't finished. The confrontation had unleashed something ugly in her, a need to reassert the social hierarchy that Maria's abilities had threatened. Don't you dare walk away from me, Dr. Whitfield called out. I'm not done with this conversation. Maria turned back, her eyes meeting Dr. Whitfield's with a steadiness that was both dignified and heartbreaking. Yes, you are, Maria said, because this was never really about mathematics. It was about you needing to believe that people like me can't be as smart as people like you, and nothing I do will ever change that. The next morning arrived gray and heavy, matching the mood that had settled over both women after their confrontation. Maria had spent the night staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, replaying the events in Dr. Whitfield's classroom. For 8 years, she had maintained her quiet anonymity, content to pursue mathematics in private while earning a living through honest work. Now that protection was gone. Dr. Whitfield had also slept poorly, her mind churning with uncomfortable questions and unwelcome revelations. She had arrived at school early, hoping to find some way to make sense of what had happened. Standing in her empty classroom, she stared at the whiteboard where Maria's elegant solution still remained, a tangible reminder that her assumptions about intelligence and education had been shattered. Word of the incident had begun to spread through the school in the mysterious way that dramatic news always did. Sarah Chen, the chemistry teacher, had heard whispers from students about raised voices coming from the mathematics department the previous afternoon. By lunchtime, several faculty members were quietly discussing the rumor that something significant had happened between Dr. Whitfield and one of the custodial staff. Maria tried to go about her normal routine, but she could feel the weight of curious stares and hushed conversations following her through the hallways. Some students looked at her with new interest, while others seemed confused by the attention being paid to someone they had never really noticed before. The situation came to a head during Dr. Whitfield's afternoon advanced placement class. She had intended to use Maria's solution as a teaching example, but as she looked at the elegant mathematical work on the whiteboard, she found herself unable to begin the lesson. "Dr. Whitfield?" asked Jessica, one of her top students. "Are you okay? You seem distracted today." Dr. Whitfield realized that her students were staring at her with concern. She had been standing silently for several minutes, lost in her own thoughts. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Today we're going to work on advanced integration techniques. As you can see, I've prepared a challenging example for us to work through together." She gestured toward the whiteboard where Maria's solution was displayed, but she couldn't bring herself to acknowledge who had actually solved the problem. "This is really advanced stuff," commented Marcus, another strong student. "The person who solved this really knows their calculus." "Yes," Dr. Whitfield replied stiffly. "It demonstrates the level of mathematical sophistication we're working toward in this class." But as she began to explain the solution, Dr. Whitfield found herself in the uncomfortable position of teaching from work that she hadn't created. Maria's approach was actually more elegant than the method Dr. Whitfield would have used. incorporating insights that revealed a deeper understanding of the mathematical relationships involved. Meanwhile, Maria was working in another part of the building when she was approached by Tommy Rodriguez, the student she had helped with his algebra problem weeks earlier. "Miss Maria," Tommy said excitedly, "I heard you're really good at math. Is it true you solved one of Dr. Whitfield's impossible problems?" Maria paused in her cleaning to look at the young man. Tommy was a good student who struggled with mathematics not because he lacked ability, but because no one had ever taken the time to explain concepts in a way he could understand. "Mathematics isn't impossible for anyone, Tommy," Maria said gently. "It just requires patience and the right way of looking at problems." Tommy's eyes lit up with hope. "Could you help me with my homework sometimes? You explain things so much better than my teacher does." Before Maria could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Principal Janet Morrison, a tall woman in her 50s who had been running Riverside High School for over a decade. She approached them with a serious expression that made Maria's stomach tighten with anxiety. "Miss Santos," Principal Morrison said formally, "I need to speak with you in my office." Maria felt her world tilting. She had always been careful to keep her head down and avoid any situation that might draw administrative attention. Now she was being summoned to the principal's office like a misbehaving student. "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied quietly, setting down her cleaning supplies. As they walked through the hallways toward the administrative offices, Maria noticed that other staff members were watching their progress with interest. The whispers and curious glances confirmed her fears that word of yesterday's confrontation had spread throughout the school. Principal Morrison's office was a study in professional authority, with diplomas and awards covering the walls alongside photographs of successful graduating classes. Maria had cleaned this office countless times over the years, but sitting across from the principal's desk as the subject of official attention felt completely different. "Miss Santos," Principal Morrison began, consulting a file on her desk, "I've received some concerning reports about an incident yesterday involving you and Dr. Whitfield. I'd like to hear your side of what happened." Maria took a deep breath, knowing that her response could determine her future at the school. "Dr. Whitfield asked me to solve a mathematics problem to prove that I understood calculus. I solved it and she became upset. Dr. Whitfield claims that you were insubordinate and disrespectful," Principal Morrison said, reading from notes in the file. "She says you challenged her expertise and made inappropriate comments about the mathematics curriculum." "That's not what happened," Maria said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "She asked me to prove I could do mathematics, so I did. When I solved her problem correctly, she accused me of lying and cheating." Principal Morrison studied Maria's face carefully. She had been an educator long enough to recognize when someone was telling the truth, and Maria's account had the ring of authenticity. "Miss Santos, I have to ask you directly. Do you really have advanced mathematical abilities? Because if you do, that raises some important questions about how we're utilizing human resources at this school." Maria nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I've been studying mathematics on my own for many years. I understand calculus, differential equations, and linear algebra. I've been helping students with their homework informally, but I never meant to cause any problems." Principal Morrison leaned back in her chair, processing this information. As an administrator, she was always looking for ways to improve student outcomes and make better use of available resources. The idea that they had been employing someone with advanced mathematical skills as a janitor was both surprising and intriguing. "Would you be willing to demonstrate these abilities?" Principal Morrison asked. "I already did that for Dr. Whitfield yesterday," Maria replied. "That's what started this whole situation." "I mean for me," Principal Morrison clarified. "I'd like to see for myself what you're capable of." Maria felt a familiar mix of hope and apprehension. Every time she revealed her mathematical abilities, she risked rejection and disbelief. But she also knew that hiding her talents had not protected her from conflict. "Yes, ma'am. I'll show you whatever you'd like to see." Principal Morrison stood up and walked to a small whiteboard mounted on her office wall. She picked up a marker and began writing a mathematical equation, drawing from her own background in secondary education and the advanced problems she had seen during classroom observations. "This is a problem involving related rates," Principal Morrison said as she wrote. "It's the kind of question that appears on advanced placement calculus examinations. A ladder is sliding down a wall and we need to find how fast the angle between the ladder and the ground is changing. Maria approached the whiteboard and studied the problem. It was indeed challenging, requiring careful application of the chain rule and understanding of trigonometric relationships. But it was also familiar territory for her. "This is a classic optimization problem," Maria said, picking up the marker. "We need to set up the relationship between the variables and then differentiate with respect to time." She began working through the problem, explaining her reasoning as she wrote. Her approach was systematic and clear, showing not just computational ability but genuine mathematical insight. "We know that the ladder, wall and ground form a right triangle," Maria explained as she drew a diagram. "If we call the angle theta, then we have relationships involving sine and cosine that we can differentiate implicitly." As Maria worked through the solution, Principal Morrison found herself impressed not just by the mathematical competence being demonstrated, but by the clarity of the explanation. This was not someone who had memorized procedures. This was someone who truly understood the underlying mathematical concepts. When Maria finished the problem, Principal Morrison stared at the whiteboard in amazement. The solution was complete, correct, and elegantly presented. "Miss Santos," Principal Morrison said slowly, "this is remarkable. How long have you been able to do mathematics at this level?" "Since I was a child," Maria replied honestly. "I've always loved numbers and patterns. I taught myself calculus when I was in my 20s, and I've been studying advanced mathematics ever since." Principal Morrison returned to her desk and made some notes in Maria's file. "I think we need to have a broader conversation about your role at this school. It seems to me that we may be wasting your talents." "I'm grateful for my job," Maria said quickly. "I don't want to cause any trouble." "You're not causing trouble," Principal Morrison assured her. "But I think there might be opportunities for you to contribute to our educational mission in ways that would benefit both you and our students." As Maria left the principal's office, she felt a mixture of hope and uncertainty. For the first time in years, someone in authority had recognized her abilities and suggested that they might be valued. But she also knew that change was never simple, and that Dr. Whitfield's reaction suggested there would be resistance to any attempt to alter the established order. Meanwhile, Dr. Whitfield was struggling with her own crisis of confidence. The elegant solution on her whiteboard served as a constant reminder that her assumptions about intelligence and education had been fundamentally challenged. She had built her professional identity around the belief that mathematical expertise was earned through formal credentials and institutional training. Maria's abilities threatened that entire worldview. As the school day ended, both women faced an uncertain future. The confrontation had set in motion a series of events that would force everyone at Riverside High School to reconsider their assumptions about intelligence, opportunity, and human potential. 3 weeks had passed since Maria's meeting with Principal Morrison, and the entire atmosphere at Riverside High School had begun to shift in ways both subtle and profound. Word of the janitor who could solve advanced calculus problems had spread beyond the school walls, reaching parents, school board members, and local media outlets who were intrigued by the human interest story. Principal Morrison had spent those 3 weeks working behind the scenes, consulting with district administrators and exploring options for how the school might better utilize Maria's remarkable abilities. The solution she eventually proposed was both innovative and controversial. Maria would be offered a position as a mathematics tutor and teaching assistant while continuing her custodial duties on a reduced schedule. The announcement was made during a faculty meeting on a Monday afternoon, and the reaction was immediate and divided. Some teachers, particularly those who had witnessed Maria's abilities firsthand, were supportive and excited about the potential benefits for students. Others, led by Dr. Whitfield, viewed the proposal as a dangerous precedent that threatened professional standards and institutional hierarchy. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Dr. Whitfield declared during the meeting. "We can't just promote a janitor to a teaching position because she can solve a few math problems. What about proper qualifications? What about professional standards? What message does this send about the value of education and training?" Sarah Chen, the chemistry teacher who had become one of Maria's supporters, raised her hand to respond. "Patricia, with respect, we've all seen what Maria can do. She's been helping our students succeed for years, just quietly and informally. Now we have a chance to make that help official and more systematic." "But she doesn't have a teaching degree," Dr. Whitfield insisted. She doesn't have proper certification or pedagogical training. You can't just put someone in front of a classroom because they're good at math. Principal Morrison had anticipated this resistance and came prepared with a carefully thought-out response. Maria won't be placed in front of a classroom as a primary instructor, she explained. She'll be working as a tutor and teaching assistant, supporting our existing mathematics teachers and helping students who are struggling with basic concepts. Her role will be to supplement our current programs, not replace professionally trained educators. The debate continued for nearly an hour, revealing deep philosophical divisions among the faculty about intelligence, credentials, and the nature of expertise. Some teachers argued that Maria's abilities proved that talent could emerge from unexpected places and should be recognized regardless of formal credentials. Others maintained that proper education and training were essential prerequisites for any teaching role. During this time, Maria herself had been experiencing a whirlwind of emotions and opportunities. Local news stations had picked up the story, wanting to interview the remarkable woman who had taught herself advanced mathematics while working as a school janitor. College professors from nearby universities had reached out, offering to help her pursue formal credentials if she was interested. Most importantly, students throughout the school had begun seeking her out for mathematical help, and she had discovered a passion for teaching that she never knew she possessed. Tommy Rodriguez had become one of her most enthusiastic advocates, telling anyone who would listen how Maria had transformed his understanding of algebra. "She doesn't make you feel stupid when you don't understand something," he explained to a reporter. "She just finds a different way to explain it until it makes sense." Dr. Whitfield watched these developments with growing frustration and resentment. The attention being paid to Maria felt like a personal attack on everything she had worked to achieve. She had spent years earning advanced degrees, publishing research, and building her reputation as a mathematics educator. The idea that a janitor with no formal training could be considered her equal was deeply threatening to her sense of professional identity. The situation came to a head on a Thursday afternoon when Dr. Whitfield encountered Maria in the mathematics department, working with a group of students who were struggling with pre-calculus concepts. The informal tutoring session was taking place in a spare classroom, and the energy was remarkable. Students who had been failing were finally beginning to understand mathematical concepts that had previously seemed impossible. "I still don't understand how you make it look so easy," said Jennifer, a junior who had been struggling with trigonometry for months. "Mathematics is like learning a language," Maria explained patiently. "Once you understand the basic vocabulary and grammar, you can start to see the patterns and relationships. The key is not to memorize formulas, but to understand why they work." Dr. Whitfield stood in the doorway listening to the explanation and watching the students' faces light up with understanding. Despite her resentment, she had to admit that Maria's teaching was effective. The students were engaged and learning in ways that hadn't been happening in the traditional classroom setting. But Dr. Whitfield's professional pride wouldn't allow her to acknowledge this success. Instead, she saw it as further evidence that proper educational standards were being undermined. "Miss Santos," Dr. Whitfield interrupted, entering the classroom. "I need to speak with you privately." The students looked up with disappointment, clearly not wanting their tutoring session to end. Maria excused herself and followed Dr. Whitfield into the hallway. "This has gone too far," Dr. Whitfield said, her voice tight with anger. "You're undermining the authority of trained educators. Students are starting to think that formal education doesn't matter, that anyone can teach mathematics." Maria looked at Dr. Whitfield with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She recognized the fear and insecurity behind the anger, and she felt genuinely sorry for the pain that her success was causing. "Dr. Whitfield," Maria said gently, "I'm not trying to replace you or diminish your achievements. I'm just trying to help students who are struggling. Isn't that what we all want?" "What we want is to maintain professional standards," Dr. Whitfield replied. "Mathematics education requires proper training and credentials. You can't just decide you're a teacher because you're good at solving problems." "You're right," Maria agreed. "I'm not a professionally trained teacher, but I am someone who understands mathematics and cares about helping students succeed. Maybe there's room for both approaches." The conversation was interrupted by Principal Morrison, who had been looking for both women. "Perfect timing," she said. "I have some news that I think you'll both want to hear." She led them to her office where she had prepared a formal announcement about Maria's new role at the school. The district administration had approved the pilot program, and Maria would begin her new duties the following week. Additionally, Principal Morrison continued, the local community college has offered Maria a full scholarship to pursue a teaching degree, while she continues working at the school. This will allow her to gain the formal credentials that some people feel are necessary, while continuing to help our students. Dr. Whitfield felt the last of her objections crumbling away. If Maria was going to pursue proper credentials while continuing to demonstrate remarkable teaching ability, there would be little basis for continued opposition. But more than that, Dr. Whitfield was beginning to recognize something uncomfortable about her own motivations. Her resistance to Maria's success hadn't really been about professional standards or educational quality. It had been about protecting her own sense of superiority and exclusivity. Maria, Dr. Whitfield said slowly, I owe you an apology. I've been treating you badly, and it wasn't really about your qualifications or your abilities. It was about my own insecurities and prejudices. Maria looked at Dr. Whitfield with surprise. This was the first time the mathematics department head had ever addressed her by name, let alone offered an apology. I was wrong to mock you and dismiss your abilities, Dr. Whitfield continued. You've shown me that intelligence and wisdom can come from places I never expected. I hope you'll consider working with me to help our students succeed. The offer of collaboration was unexpected and generous. Maria extended her hand to Dr. Whitfield, who shook it with genuine respect for the first time. 6 months later, Maria's tutoring program had become one of the most successful interventions in the school's history. Student performance in mathematics had improved dramatically, and several universities had reached out to study the program as a model for other schools. Maria had begun taking courses toward her teaching degree, and Dr. Whitfield had become one of her most supportive colleagues. The story of the janitor who solved calculus problems had become a powerful reminder that human potential exists in every corner of society, waiting to be recognized and nurtured. It challenged assumptions about intelligence, education, and social hierarchy, proving that wisdom and ability are not the exclusive domain of any particular class or background. Most importantly, it demonstrated that when we look beyond our prejudices and assumptions, we might discover that the person cleaning our floors or serving our coffee or working in any humble capacity might possess gifts and insights that could change our understanding of what human beings are capable of achieving. Maria Santos had spent 8 years being invisible in the hallways of Riverside High School. Now she was proof that intelligence, determination, and human dignity could triumph over prejudice and narrow-minded assumptions about who deserves to be heard and valued in our society.